Hello. There we go. Anybody else going to trickle in? Let's just get going. Let's get started here. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Saturday session of the RTDNA conference. And yes, my name is Brian Daly. I'm a professor at the University of King's College School of Journalism in Halifax. Before that, a longtime broadcast journalist. And I've seen so many familiar faces here from broadcasting, including the members of our panel today. And so this is an ongoing issue, the whole question of diversity in news. So the next two sessions are actually going to be talking about recruiting and retention. There's so much we can say about the diversity question, but I wanted to make sure that we spent an hour showing everyone some tangible, some very realizable solutions to the question of making sure that our newsrooms are reflecting the community as much as possible. There is a disconnect, certainly, now that I've shifted from the television newsrooms into academia. I have a lot more contact with Gen Z, and also my kids are in that age bracket too, and there is this massive disconnect. Obviously, we know that people in that age bracket are not consuming news the way that we did, and sometimes not consuming our output at all. And there are some very specific reasons that some of my students have given me for why this is, which is that they understand the newsroom culture now. They either know people who work in newsrooms, they've seen some of the doom and gloom forecasts, and the jobs in our industry are not as attractive to young people as they can be. But the good news here, and this is actually not a doom and gloom panel, good news panel, because we have some ideas that we can share with people as to how things can improve. So first thing I'll do is introduce our distinguished panel, and I thank you so much all for coming here today. To my immediate left is Nick Davis, who's the Executive Director of Equity and Inclusion at CBC English Services, and thanks for coming, Nick. All right. Bhupinder Hundal is the News Director and Station Manager at Global BC. You might have traveled the furthest of almost anyone to get here, and so thanks so much for coming.
Awesome.
All right. And my friend Sherry Okeke, who's the Assistant Professor of Journalism, recent Assistant Professor. She and I have entered academia very recently in the last couple of years. She's at TMU, and before that, she was a Senior Producer at CBC. Thanks for coming, Sherry. Thanks for coming, Sherry. I appreciate that. So before we launch into some questions, I did want to show you some data from the Canadian Association of Journalists, their diversity survey, which is now going into its third year. Just the fact that this survey was able to gather useful data is itself a tremendous thing, because 10 years ago, the former chair of the TMU School of Journalism, John Miller, had a research project where he surveyed newsrooms across the country, sent out all sorts of, I can't remember the number right now, hundreds of surveys to try to paint a portrait of Canada's newsrooms. This would have been in 2011, 2012. The turnout and the results were poor. John even says he got spoiled surveys back. So some people not only didn't want to fill them out, but were upset and offended that he would even ask, what is the demographic makeup of your newsroom? Thankfully, in the last 10 years, we've come quite a bit farther, and so the CAJ has come up with some numbers on underrepresentation. This sets the stage for our panel. It's the Canadian Newsroom Diversity Survey. It's found that 1/2 of all newsrooms employ exclusively white journalists, and that more than 8 in 10 supervisor roles, those key, usually top 3 positions in newsrooms, are staffed exclusively by white journalists, at least in 2021 when the ballots were sent out. 8 in 10 Canadian news outlets, this is across all platforms, not a single visible minority or Indigenous journalist in a leadership position. Can you guys bring it back one for me, please? That sets the stage for this panel. How do we increase representation in our newsrooms? Answers are sometimes hard to come by. Some feel overwhelmed, but there are some answers here on the panel. I want to throw open now, right, to all of you, first of all, and a reaction to the numbers.
Well, I'm not surprised by those statistics. I mean, I've been a journalist this is my 36th year as a journalist, started back in 1987, and often was only the only representation in many of the rooms I've worked in for many, many years. Now, I can say it's changed. It's changed a lot over the past few years. But is there enough representation still in newsrooms? Well, to me, it depends on where you are, which part of the country you work in, what type of work you do. But I still think we have a long way to go in actually being a little bit more reflective of the audiences that we serve, especially in newsrooms.
And so any other thoughts then about what this is showing us about our newsrooms in this country? Bhupinder?
Lots of work to do and lots of work ahead. And I think this journey that we're on is not going to be one that's going to stop. It's ever evolving. There's always going to be changes and things that we can do better. But ultimately, I think what this really tells us is leaders really need to look at the makeup of their team. And I'm going to use the most diverse example I could utilize, which is hockey. You're going to laugh at that one. Hockey? What do you mean? If you look at, there's 6 defensemen on a team, right? There's 12 forwards. They all don't do the same thing. And you can't have a makeup of your team where all the players are doing the exact same thing. A defenseman will be a stay-at-home defenseman, or there might be a defensive player who's more offensive in their game. You have to have the right kind of mixture and those tools and traits that you need in order to have a successful team. Because if you have too many players doing the same thing, Toronto Maple Leafs, you're not going to be very successful. So I had to work that in. But I think what this ultimately tells us is that if you look around the room and you see a lot of the same things and a lot of the same people doing the same kind of stuff, you're not really going to have a successful team. You need to develop a team where somebody has a linguistic skill that you don't have on your team, or somebody has a community perspective that you don't have. And usually we think about diversity with regards to technical skills or a beat, like the crime beat or the politics beat, but it needs to be broadened to community, geographically, and based on where you are geographically, the demographics in that community are going to be very different. So do you have a room that, takes up or takes stock of what that is? And if it doesn't, as a leader, you need to really examine and look at that.
And Sherry, you deal every day with young people. What are they telling you? Do they see the situation in newsrooms? Are they interested in getting into the business, even?
Okay, that's a big question. There's a lot of questions in there.
Two questions, I know.
Where do
I'd be
I
careful
start?
how I ask questions around journalists. Eh?
Can I just respond to something that's already been said?
Yes,
first?
absolutely.
Okay, so in terms of, I really like what you're saying about the team and look around and see who's missing. I'm a strong believer in that. But that starts with who's running the team.
Yeah.
Who's running the team? And it's about more than representation in that you can't solve this problem by getting someone who looks a certain way to run the team. It's more than that. You have to have someone who thinks a certain way and has lived experience and has professional experience. So I think it comes from leadership, and there has to be a shift away from checking boxes. Oh, we said this, we did this. Oh, we put someone who looks like you in a position over here. Are you supporting that person? Does that person have experience? Because when they don't, that hurts us actually.
And so talking about supporting that person, it raises the question, is hiring in and of itself enough to address this issue? If not, what more needs to be done?
I would say it's absolutely not enough. And just to get back to, sorry, I skipped over one of your questions about students, but I've been really impressed in the short time that I've been working as a professor. It's only been a little more than a year, and I wasn't really sure what to expect. And I've been really impressed by the enthusiasm of the students and their critical thinking and their passion about very important topics and what they want to see coverage on. And yet, at the same time, their first hesitation is always about toxicity in a newsroom. That is the first question I get, whether it's a student in my class or a student in a class that I'm a guest speaker in. It's always, how do you manage that? How do you take care of your mental health? How do you cope with that? And it's a good question to ask, because I think when we look at, we're more trauma informed now than we were before, but we tend to only think of the journalist's well-being when they're in a very obviously traumatic situation. They're covering war, they're covering a murder trial, you know. And I mean, I haven't covered war, but I've been in courtrooms with horrific details. And even in that, and my students have asked me, so what kind of support were you offered? And then and I've talked to other profs of my generation. I've been doing this since, I've been a journalist since '97. And we have to be transparent and tell the students, like, nobody talked about this stuff when we were learning. We were learning about journalism. And they're demanding resources, and they're demanding strategies. And I think that's a positive thing, and I think that's a healthy thing, and I don't think that we should dismiss that or look down on people as not being tough enough to be a journalist. So I think it's more than representation. It's more than representation just visually appearing to be representative. I mean, because sometimes people will look at a room and say, oh, wow, there are lots of people of different skin colors here. But maybe, like, we all have the same educational background. We're all from the same socioeconomic background. And maybe we've all learned how to make
all
a
gone
very...
to the same J school and learned the same.
Yeah.
Much.
Yeah.
Think about journalism the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, the question you asked about, is it more than just representation? Is that enough? Like, just hiring people? Well, of course it's not enough. It's not enough for anybody, whether you're black, white, Asian, doesn't matter. It's not enough. What we need to do is make sure that when we do bring people in, it is that question about how are we supporting them. A good example I can give you is, sometimes I read press releases when someone got a job, right? So we've hired the first black woman or the first indigenous person. I mean, and I see them to this day still, and I think, like, why aren't we embarrassed that we're actually saying that in 2023? Like, it should be embarrassed. We should be embarrassed. We shouldn't be celebrating that. We should be embarrassed by that. But why aren't we selling why we hired them? Like, why aren't we talking about their track record, the stories they've done, the journals they've done, the things they've developed, the initiatives they've created? Like, that's what should be in the press. That should be the lead. Like, if I look at the picture, I'm pretty sure I'm going to recognize that that's a person from a color. Like, I'm pretty sure you don't need to have that on the headline. And we still do it. And I think we do it for good reason, but the reason why it's not a good thing to do is because when I walk into that room and you say I'm the first black, and it happened to me when I was the editor-in-chief of the school paper at Excalibur, they made a big announcement I was the first black man to be the editor-in-chief of the paper. Everyone questioned whether I was only there because I was black. Like, that's the first, because that's the first thing you put in the press release. And they never talked about the credentials about why I got the job. That, I was an award-winning writer in this other space here. I had created these other programs while I was at university for writing. I'd done a bunch of different things, but no one ever talked about that. It was just this. And so it actually sets me up. It's actually not setting me up for success or support and that's the kind of support we need. And how are we making sure we're supporting people in those roles? And then I'll just take it one step further before I let someone else say something. Are you is my boss even qualified to manage someone like me if they don't understand me and where I come from and how I think and my life? And I don't expect everybody to understand everybody, but I expect you, at the bare minimum, is to get to know me first before you make judgments about me and before you start thinking, well, this isn't the right person for the job when you don't know me. Because I've been in situations where I was told, like, why are you the senior producer of this radio show? Have you ever done a radio show before? And I said, why don't you ask me what my history is first? Because I actually been in radio for 10 years before I came to this place, producing radio shows. And so to me, it's around even getting to know our teams intimately. And I don't know if a lot of managers have ever had to do that before, because the people in the room always look like them. There's no need to learn about some other person's culture or upbringing or how they think about the world.
I just want to springboard on what both of you are talking about. When it comes to hiring, it isn't enough. There's a lot of other pieces that need to come into play as well. But when it comes to the toxicity in newsrooms and how we need to change the conversation, I think we need to, in the hiring process, change the questions that we're asking. and what kind of competencies do we want candidates to display. And then we also need to score candidates a little bit differently. Like we score on technical skills and what kind of experience they have, but we also need to evaluate and score on other aspects that we haven't traditionally scored on. And some of those things would be as simple as, and I would ask all candidates this, is, okay, let's just say there's a story happening in a certain part of a community. How do you source contacts in that community? How do you source contacts in communities that you are not familiar with? How do you build a relationship with someone who is not within your circle? How do you nurture and develop those relationships over time? How has those relationships netted you stories that you've never been able to tell before, but you have told? That will lend you a lot, and you learn a lot too. And speaking of diversity, there are many journalists who are diverse but are also white passing. There are many journalists who are of diverse backgrounds but don't have a cultured experience in their upbringing. There's a lot of things you have to examine and a lot of questions you need to ask. And by asking good questions in the interview process, you can learn a lot. And the one thing that I think in terms of addressing toxicity in newsrooms that we have to get away from is we all journalists have an ego and we all think we know everything. Like, if I speak, I'm the smartest in the room, or my opinion is the best one, and I'm going to use my opinion to override your opinion because my opinion is more important than yours. But one of the things we have to realize is that, A, we don't know everything. And because we don't know everything, the conversation we should be having is, what can I learn? Right? Like, I don't know everything about this story or about this subject or about this thing. How do I enter the conversation and be like, this is my perspective. What is your perspective? Why do you see it differently? How does a certain section of the population see this issue differently? Like, you got to open yourself up to get more in. And if you have conversations that are more like this instead of like this, that's what's going to cause people to leave. So I think we all have to be in a constant state of learning in every interaction that we do, that we don't know everything. And because that we don't know everything, we're acknowledging the fact that we need to learn something else. And that's going to make us better, and it's going to make the people around us better.
Right, right. And I wanted to piggyback off that to get to the next thought, which is one of the solutions that's been implemented in our industry over many decades now is the employment equity, certainly targeted hiring. I wanted you to all to address that one specifically, because I've was brought into the CBC out of journalism school under one of these diversity programs, and it was a total disaster because the executive producer wasn't the one who made the decision. The money didn't come from his funding envelope, but yet he was my boss. So he did everything he could to get me out of that place, and he did within 12 months, and it didn't work at all in that situation. I felt as though I had a target on my back. Mm-hmm. Like I say, the funding for my salary didn't even come from the station's budget. It came from another part of the country. What can be done to set people up for success when they come into these positions? Or is there another solution other than making it clear to everybody, this person is here as the diversity hire?
So I'm just going to jump this one. So
It's a very
loaded thing.
yeah. And before you even say anything,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say that I'm not embarrassed by those programs at all. I think we have to have real expectations around those programs, because if you think about it as a race, okay, and it's a 100-meter race, and we're starting at the 150-yard line for a 100-meter race, we're so far back. If we want to ever get to a place where we're actually having proper representation, we have to do something to kind of springboard that. So that's the intention of those programs. But the problem is that there's too many people who think that because we have a program that the person we're hiring actually is not qualified. Well, then that's when the program's a failure, or when the person who's hiring it doesn't believe this program's going to help their program in terms of helping it become better. And I think the more programs we have like this, I do think we actually improve our journalism, because we get different perspectives at the table, different voices at the table. It just better. But if we don't change the mindset of the people who are hiring and bringing in people to understand the value of those voices that we're bringing in and the value and how they're going to help us with our storytelling and help us be better journalists and improve our journalism, well, then you're right. They're ripe to fail because this person wasn't even thinking about you as a journalist. You're just thinking of you as this diversity hire. But if we don't have targets and we don't have things like that to actually catch up, then we're lagging behind. If that's our intention, and I'm not saying it has to be everybody's intention, but I work for the public broadcaster and we take money from all y'all. Like, you guys pay us, and so we better look like you. You know what I mean? Like, and we better make every effort to look like you. And to catch up, we have to have something. Like, we have Indigenous programs for journalists. We have, programs to try and springboard people into leadership. Like, we have them. And I know there's people in my workplace who think that these people aren't qualified. But I would suggest that whoever's running those programs should be bringing in qualified people. That's the problem. There's this perception that those people aren't qualified because they came in this way. And I would say that that's actually not true in the most case.
I've answered this question a few times over the course of my career about, is that person qualified or whatnot? And I would say, and some of my responses have varied from being polite to being very blunt, which is, okay, what's your definition of what is qualified? Because I can tell you, it's not mine, right? So, like, we have a very narrow view of what we think is qualified. And in this world, we need to have a more expanded view. And I would look at what is the unique trait that this individual is going to bring to the table that we don't have right now. And I see that as an opportunity. I see that as an opportunity because if they're bringing something that we don't have, guess what? Now we're doing something new. Now we can actually start looking at newer opportunities. We can actually start innovating because this person is going to bring something that we don't have. And until we get out of this, and we have some old thinking, right, that is toxic, which is, well, it's got to fit with what I define as being the thing. But I think we need to broaden our horizons a little bit. Because there's opportunity, and we're all struggling with declining revenues and declining audiences and so on and so forth. How do you expect to grow your audiences by doing the exact same thing that you were doing over and over and not looking at new opportunities or new ways of engagement? Like, it's just counterproductive. Like, if you want to be a successful business, you got to grow. So it's about time you figure out how to grow.
Can I just throw something at Sherry? Because me and her have worked together many times in our history, and we can tell you how many shitty journalists who are white, who I've worked with, they're shitty. And no one questions them. No one asks them about their qualifications. No one says, but you bring in a person of color. And I'm telling you, the bar is so high. Like, why, when you just hire me as a 21-year-old, should I be as good as the fucking host who's been there for 40 years? Yet that's what I'm being judged against, yet we don't judge other people against the same things. And I've worked with so many mediocre journalists, like, I'm sorry, not trying to be mean, of all shades and all colors, but I just think there's this real unbelievable high expectation and burden on people who come from those programs, and people who look like me, and people who look like Bhupinder, and people who look like my Sherry over here. And even though we work together, I still forget her name. And that's part of the problem. And Sherry, I know I've worked with her, so I've been in her spaces, and I'm saying, holy shit, like, okay, whatever. And I just kind of put my eyes around. Sorry for the swearing.
Nikki is Nikki, man. He ain't gonna change.
Sorry, I apologize.
That's why I love him so much.
I just want to springboard from a word that you used a few minutes ago about mindset, and also what you've been talking about in terms of selection and the questions you're asking people. There are two things I want to mention. One is that you mentioned white passing diversity. Okay, so I remember having knowing a journalist who was white passing, and because the organization was trying to do better on diversity, when she was in a job interview, they said, how can you contribute to our diversity goals? Or what do you know about diversity? Or some very,
formalized question.
We define white passing, just for those who don't know in the room what that means.
Pardon me?
We just define white.
Oh, I mean, it's someone who doesn't identify as white, but people might assume that they're white by looking at them. So they were being interviewed by white people, the white interviewer thought they were interviewing a white person and said, but why should we hire you? Like, what do you know about diversity? And so this is a big problem in terms of the mindset of checking boxes. We need better diversity. So we're just going to ask, how do you have better diversity? It's like asking someone, how do you stay married? You know, it's like, what's the secret? Give me the secret. What's the meaning of life? You know, it's
Bad questions from journalists. Supposedly, you're supposed to ask great questions.
Well, are they? I don't know, but they're usually managers, and they might be former journalists or whatever. But in terms of the mindset, and you're saying, look for people who have skills and things that you don't have. That has to happen at the highest level.
Yes.
And it has to be someone. It's not good enough to just say, oh, we hired a black person, or oh, we hired the person from this community. We're not all the same. Hiring one of us is not the same as hiring another one of us. So it's...
You only allowed one.
I know. Typically, we've had that conversation. But it's just to say the mindset has to change at the top. And when you were talking about learning and being open to learning, I see that on the ground with journalists. I see that on the ground, and that's what we're doing in the field, and we're trying, and everyone's trying so hard, and they're on deadlines, okay? I want to see leadership open their minds, because who's being supported, and how is it coming up, and what is the tone that is set? If the tone is set, it's like, oh, grown, we have to have more diversity. Someone says, oh, I know a good student. Well, are they white or are they not white? And it breeds a resentment on the ground.
Yes.
And it leads to a lot of tension within the newsroom, and that's problematic when ultimately this isn't about doing people favors. This isn't about hiring unqualified people. This is about being better journalists, better representation, more accuracy, accurately represent the region that you're reporting on. How can you do that if you're always having the same voices?
Can I just flip the script on something too? There's an inverse to that as well. It's like, so in my job, I of course have to hire people to do work that's about equity and inclusion. And there's this perception sometimes that just because you're a person of color, you actually know a lot about equity and inclusion work. And I'd say we need to break that myth too.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, because it's a myth. Like,
absolutely.
I know a lot of my friends who would be the most useless equity and inclusion people on the planet. Like I just do. And then the other thing is I'm trying to get away from using where I actually took diversity out of our title.
Yeah,
because,
it's a bad word now.
Well, no, it's not. I don't think it's a bad word. I think it's actually not accurate. Like, to me, when you hear the word diversity, you just think about people of color, and you think of Indigenous people, and you think of
code.
But no, diversity is everybody in the room, white, black. That's diversity. So to me, I'm really trying to figure out how we can be equitable and be inclusive and make people feel like they belong in a place. And I'm trying to get away from that, because when you use words like that, people think the word means something else that I actually don't mean. When I say the word, and I use the word diversity, I actually mean everybody in the room.
Yeah.
I mean everything from geography to politics to age to color to race. And I mean everybody is included in that definition. If I want to talk about black people, I'll say black people. If I want to talk about Indigenous people, I'll say Indigenous people. And I'm going to be really clear about what I'm talking about. And when we create particular programs to promote, like at CBC, and this could have changed since I last checked, but at one point last year, there was not a single black or Indigenous male who was producing a current affairs program in the entire country. And we have lots of black and Indigenous males who work at CBC. And so when I target a program to fix that, I'm not going to water it down and make it about other things. It's going to be about that specific thing. And those are the kind of initiatives and actions you have to do to make change.
Right. Like
you have to see where your gaps are, where your opportunities are, and you got to take advantage of them. And so it can't be this broad thing like that's diversity. It's that I just want to make sure that we understand that.
Yeah.
I hear the word, and when people hear the word, they get turned off because they think it's about people of color. And actually, diversity is about everybody. It's not about people of color.
And a lesson for everybody here is that this is a core journalistic principle, not just for those of you who are students, but for those of you who are in the business. Specificity is important here. And you are going to get a chance to ask some questions. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I did want to end by talking about young people. Listen, the young people in my classes, 2/3 of our students at King's who are currently enrolled in the School of Journalism out in Halifax have told us that they do not intend to get into the business, only about 1/3. Maybe some of the things we're talking about in this panel might have something to do with that. So let's spend the last 5 minutes or so talking about what young people are telling us and how we can get them engaged and interested in getting into this, what for me personally was a wonderful career, tremendous industry. That's my personal view.
I'm going to the professor on this one.
Something that struck me last year was I had a student, a young woman of color, who was quite panicked about a grade. And she hadn't even done the assignment yet. So this is not a grade that she was unhappy with. This is a grade that she hadn't even done the work yet for. And she was panicked because she told me, I have to get into law school. And I said, you have to get into law school? I mean, that's great and everything, but like, why are we panicking? You know, you have a bit of time. You're not even, you know, at the end of your career, at the end of your degree yet. This degree, we got to get this degree done, right? And she said, well, I've been told by a journalist with a lot of experience that there's no hope for me, that I should just forget about being able to make change, and that when I go, I can think about making change, but when I go in, I'm going to have all white men for bosses. And so there's no hope, and I'm going to have to do something else. And I just was so taken aback. I really sat with that because this student was actually really in a panic in that moment. And I just realized this is really heavy, you know, because they said, oh, I'm rethinking my life choices and all this sort of thing. And I really sat with that. And so the first thing that I said to this student was, I don't know about the experience of that other journalist. I can't speak for that person. But I can tell you in my career, much of it at CBC, all of the leadership that I can remember, that I can name off the top of my head, are women. They're women. So that's just factually incorrect based on my experience. Yep. Now, they're not women who look like you or me, the majority, right? But they are women. So there's a factual error in what the person told you. And then it's just like, let's slow it down. And she just kept thinking, maybe there's no space for me, maybe there's no space for me. But it's not because she thinks she's not good enough. She thinks she won't be heard, or her achievements won't even be recognized because of what Nikki was talking about earlier, about the way that people look at us, like, how are you qualified? How did you get here? What's going on? And so there is a real concern about how people are going to be treated. And as I said before, there's a lot of questions about toxicity. And this generation, what I would say is, they're not willing to put up with what a lot of people think that they should just suck it up and put up with.
Stuff we put up with.
And you know what? I think we have to go deeper than representation, but there has to be respect. I mean, this sounds basic, but you've got to respect the students. You've got to respect their generation. You've got to respect what they're saying about, like, you can't just pass it off as youth. They're experiencing a world that we did not experience when we were that age. Okay, I was like 30 when I got a cell phone. So, and this isn't just like, oh, your parents are bad, they gave you a cell phone. It's not the point. It's bigger than that, right? So I had a student this week breaking down because of what's going on in the Middle East and saying to me, I thought I was okay. I thought I was okay, and I'm realizing today I'm not okay. And they don't feel that newsrooms can cope with their humanity. It's not about qualified or not qualified. Right. And in a time when, you know, people can't afford houses, people can't afford rent, you need to have a job, you need to make money. And if you're going to take crap, excuse my language, you're going to take it from the highest paying crap job that you can get.
It's not bad language.
Compared to what Nikki was saying,
I'm just saying they're smart. They're smarter. They're smarter than people think.
So then, look, Bhupinder,
Yep.
you're hearing all this. You're a hiring manager.
Yep.
And Sherry's question in my pre-interview with her was, a lot of them still want to be journalists, but do they want to be journalists for you? As in, do they want to be journalists at your station? That's an open question, perhaps.
I want young people to be journalists at our station for sure. And I think there's a multitude of things that we have to do. I know we specifically at Global BC are doing a number of different things. to engage youth. We're reaching out to community groups and saying, hey, we want to have your youth groups come into the station, and we'll do a whole tour and we'll get you exposed, and like go at the high school level and try to engage young people and get them interested in the business. But we also got to create our culture. We spent a lot of time on how we need to diversify how it is that we do our jobs and how it is that we have conversations. One of the things we've also done is we've done extensive editorial boards. I know CBC does a number of those. We have done them at the local level too, but they're not one-offs, right? We have designed them to be consistently ongoing with like 8 or 9 people in them, because we all know, to your point, just because one person and you've checked a box, there is a massive diversity of opinion that exists within a particular group. There is not one only opinion that exists throughout an entire community. And to show that and demonstrate that, we expose our teams to those kinds of conversations. We play stories and be like, hey, this is a story we just ran. What's your feedback? And the kind of feedback that we get through that exercise is an important exercise for our group to be exposed to that kind of conversation, a conversation that they wouldn't ordinarily have an exposure to. So there's all these initiatives that we need to try. I would say to young people, like, I've experienced this all my life on a personal level. There's nobody that looks like me that is in this space. I'm the only, very often I've been the only person who looks like me who's been in the room. The only other broadcaster that I know or working in broadcast media who looks like me is Harnarayan Singh, who we did work together, right? So there is hope. There is a lot of opportunity. I've been so blessed and privileged to do the things that I've done and the amazing things that I've been able to accomplish. Is it frustrating? 100%. Is it hard? It definitely is hard. Do you have to push and persevere and continue to learn and continue to evolve and continue to innovate? 100%. So to all the young people, I think now is a better time than it was during my time. And I hope all of you take full advantage of that opportunity and know that there's people like me and others who are in places who are wanting to support you and help you get there. I think there is, as much as we talk about doom and gloom, because that's what journalists like to do, there is hope and there is opportunity.
Last word to Nikki.
Well, I think I used to lecture at college journalism programs and university programs. I've been doing it for a long time, and I see over the years that those classes are changing, which is a good thing, and the classes are looking far more representative. But if you really want to win this battle, we got to get people when they're young and get them interested in news and get them interested in the media and see it as a viable option for work. And what helps, though, is when you turn on the news, you see yourself in it. Like, that's what really helps. Like, because I don't want to be in a space where I don't think I'm welcome, and I'm not trying to be there. I love hockey. I've lived in Montreal. I grew up in Montreal here in Canada. Big Canadian fan when I was younger, and I never ever thought I could be a hockey player growing up. I played hockey and I was pretty good. And when I got to be in grade 6, I stopped playing because I just didn't see a space for me there. And so the more we make people see a space for them in the work we do and as journalists, then the more the younger people will think, oh, okay, I see myself there. As a 12-year-old, I stopped playing hockey because I didn't think I had a future. And I was actually a really good hockey player. I know I was good. I was one of the best skaters in our school. But I just didn't see a space for me, so I switched to another sport. Where I saw myself, I switched to basketball. Where I saw myself. Okay?
There you go. There you go. And I wanted to leave you all with something to take home, which is, if we as journalists can get ourselves out there into young people's places, for example, the schools, it can have a tangible effect. Just before I left the news industry a couple of years ago, I was part of the Canadian Association of Black Journalists Executive, and our executive director, Nadia Stewart, who worked with you, Bhupinder, I think, she wanted us to be present in the schools to show people tangibly what journalism was all about. She came up with this idea to have newsrooms themselves actually open their doors. The pilot project for this was in Halifax, get CTV Global and CBC to open their doors to black students during Black History Month, get them in there, get their hands on cameras, hands-on, Wouldn't you know it, it was a great idea because 2 students decided to become journalists. They decided to get into journalism school just from spending 1 day at an open house. I wanted to play you a video, the guys have it queued up here, of one of the students who's currently at King's. She's graduating next year, and back in 2019, she did a tour of CTV Halifax, and she's going to tell you what impact that had on her life. You can roll it.
My name's Kendra Gannon. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I'm studying journalism. My goal career is broadcast journalism, doing like something like an anchor or something, which, you know, takes a few years to get there, but it's something that I'm really excited about.
Oh my goodness. Whoa, Kendra, that's not nice.
Let's get a picture of that rock. Get a picture of that rock.
We got to like fool around with the cameras. The really cool thing was being in the newsroom and getting to do like hands-on stuff. That entire experience really interested me and, you know, put me on the path and set me on the path of going to journalism school. For Black youth they don't really know that that's like a career for them. So it's definitely a good way to like bring people in.
Think about it. Think about duplicating that in your region of the country. I wanted to thank the panel. Thank the panel for coming. And are we going to have time for a couple of questions at least?
Look at Liz.
One.
Short, very short.
Let's,
We're running a bit. We're running half an hour late right now, so that's
we can get a question. We'll squeeze one question.
I wanted to say we're from Fanshawe. We have a very diverse program in television, news, and broadcast journalism, which is great. We also are diverse because we have people who have family on both sides of the Israeli-Hamas conflict. So those are discussions we're having in class, you know, in real time, which is really, I think, very valuable. I also wanted to say that in the 90s, I worked at the #1 station in Vancouver, and we brought in, well, we didn't, the management brought in some interns of color for all the wrong reasons. And I think it put the whole thing, sort of the whole idea of diversity and the positives, about 10 years behind, because it wasn't, they weren't doing them any benefit either. It was really very not good. And also, you spoke about toxicity in a newsroom. It's people that make it a toxic work environment, and managers have to know to get rid of the toxic people, and there will be a less toxic work environment.
Here, here.
Okay?
Good idea. Good idea. Let's try to squeeze one quick one in, then we'll wrap up. Anybody else have a question? We got one question here right next to the first question.
Thank you. So I'm with an organization that's an arts and culture-based organization focusing on advancing Black emerging artists. And I also was fortunate to work in the area of equity and diversity in the past. And I just want to address the precarious situation that an equity expert is in, right? And when we talked about the types of supports, I was wondering if the newsrooms have thought about assessment in terms of the leadership. Is there a way to assess the leadership in terms of how they're advancing equity, diversity, inclusion, and having discussions about anti-oppression? Because not being able to discuss anti-oppression when talking about equity and inclusion creates a really difficult situation in terms of advancing those areas. And then recognition for folks around those areas in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-oppression. I was wondering if that's something that you've all heard of in the past when considering that. I wanted to make quick comments. And the quick comments I wanted to just address is when U of T was looking at diversity in education and looking at instructors and how they could be more diverse, one of the Black professors said that she really needs to be challenged in the area of continuing to be courageous in the role of advancing diversity, inclusion, and equity, because her job is at risk as well, right? So when folks are being asked to speak truth to power, that is a really, really precarious position to be in, right? So what are the supportive, tools or things that are in place, processes, so that people can do that? Are we having discussions about white feelings, white fragility, white tears, microaggressions, right? And thinking about that as we're considering equity and diversity and inclusion, and how is that being considered in the interviews and like with HR, there's so much that needs to be done when looking at it comprehensively. So when we're thinking about what does support look like, these questions came to mind for me. And how does the representation need to think? Sure, you talked about that. And is representation thinking that way? So those are just some reflection. I know we don't have time to go into it.
I think you raised a lot of important issues, and I just want to bring it back to we absolutely have to go get people when they're young, but I want to make sure that they have a healthy environment to be working in when you bring them in. That's my issue. So I say in my class, I'm running this place like a real newsroom in terms of expectations of journalism standards. But we're going to go a bar higher, a notch higher, because I have control and I'm the leader in this particular environment, and I have zero tolerance for toxicity. Can I guarantee that? I can't guarantee that, but I can guarantee that that is my attitude, and that is how I'm going to approach things. And I would like to see more leadership be more focused there, because it starts from the top. The students, they don't want to piss off their prof. And the newsroom doesn't want to piss off their exec, and the exec doesn't want to piss off, and it goes like that. So it has to start at the top, and it has to be, people have to be accountable for their behavior. So yes, let's go grab students, but students are smart, and they've got a lot on their plates that we didn't have on our plates, and they don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with extreme nonsense that we unfortunately got used to dealing with.
And there you go. I mean, we have to make sure we put words into action. That's why we chose that title. And I hope that we left you with some tangible solutions that you can take forward into your newsroom, into your university and college environment. I wanted again to thank Sherry Okeke, Pinder Gundal, and Nick Davis. Thanks so much. And we are trying to keep the time here. Up next, a somewhat related panel on recruiting and retention, moderated by Ramneek Gill from CTV News.